Check 1 2, testing 1 2, check 1 2.
Today's our joint CAC TAC meeting that we have once a year, typically in December, usually. And so today, we're going to start with our public comment, but we have Commissioner Kemp that's coming at some point. I'm not sure exactly what time, Beth, if you know.
She sent her aide up to say that she's on her way.
Okay.
So I'm sorry that she's running behind. Maybe we could just take a couple of minutes.
Yeah, I figured we'd pause the meeting when she gets here and do however we're going to do that. Do you know what the plan is for that? Is she going to speak or?
I don't know that she has any prepared remarks. So it's really more intended as opportunity for some informal conversation about how things are going.
These research meetings, and if there's anybody else that
Okay. Okay. So we'll be pausing when she gets here. But first, I guess the first item of business today is public comment. Is there anybody, and I can't quite see everybody back there, but is there anybody here from the public to speak today? Or no? Is there anybody online?
Everybody online has the ability to unmute themselves if they're here for public comment.
Okay. Johnny, we usually do like a, see if we have a quorum and do like a roll call first. I don't see that on the agenda today, but
No, but Gail did mention that she would like to do the roll call, given
Okay,
the number of
well,
people in the room, if that's okay.
I think there was somebody that wanted to speak.
There is, and we.
And then maybe we can do the roll
also
call.
do self-introductions. You
Okay.
make the time for that. Service.
We can do that. We can do that. That can be our roll call. Well, let's do the roll call first, I think, just so we can make sure we have a quorum. And let's start down on this end, down in to my left.
Laura, that makes you. Randy, TPO staff.
Okay.
That's all the GPO staff.
Part of my comments.
Laura Bach with City of Tampa.
Michelle Jenkins with the Environmental Protection Commission for Jeff Sims.
Christina Costa with the CAC.
Don Skelton with the CAC.
Aya Yakin with the City of Tampa, but representing the City of Temple Terrace.
Ed Majewski, CIC, representing THEA.
Johnny Wong, TPO staff and CAC liaison.
I'm Bill Roberts of the CAC. I was appointed by the Aviation Authority.
Okay. Mike Williams, I'm on the TAC representing Hillsborough County, and I'm with Development Services in Hillsborough County.
Wade Reynolds, TAC liaison and TPO staff.
Bob Campbell with Hillsborough County Transportation Engineering.
Sarah Caper, Hillsborough County Community and Infrastructure Planning.
Hoyt Prindle on the CAC, appointed by Commissioner Pat Campbell.
Nicole Sutton, Florida Department of Health, Hillsborough Office of Health Equity, the TAC.
Brian McCarthy with the TAC, representing City of Temple Terrace.
Jonathan Scott, City of Tampa Mobility in TAC.
Jennifer Malone, I'm with the Planning Commission, and I'm the City of Tampa liaison with the TAC.
Okay, thank you. So I believe as part of the public comment, there was somebody that wanted to speak.
Yes.
On the, I believe on the CAC.
Thank you, Mike. Hearing no comment from the public, I'd like to interrupt our agenda slightly and call on CAC member Christina Costa to give us a brief follow-up report on the study she has conducted on behalf of the CAC. Christine?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am following up on a presentation and frankly, just a conversation for about a minute or two of your time regarding the high injury network and our crash results that have recently been presented, I think probably to both committees. There was some dialogue within the CAC amongst members that led me to believe that some of the false narrative that has been circulating throughout the nation about what has caused the higher crash ratings than normal during the pandemic, despite fewer trips and less driving. We all initially expected that our crash rates would go down, but they didn't. And so we had some dialogue on the CAC about that, and there is confusing and inaccurate information that's been circulated about things like maybe Americans were just so depressed that they didn't put their seatbelts on, or, other things that if you think about it are just kind of silly. So I am offering some well-sourced material and encouraging everyone here. I consider all of us leaders to be here and to channel information about transportation and transportation safety within our circles. And so a very highly regarded source is a man named Chuck Marone. He's a traffic engineer. He's written this book that is called Confessions of a Recovering Engineer. And in it, he cites a Nobel Prize-winning psychologist and economist that describes the human ability to think comes in two ways. He calls them system one and system two. System one is what we do most of the time. We operate without thinking too careful. I mean, just a kind of a more of an autopilot. And system two is when we are very, very acutely focused on whatever we're doing. It's of extreme importance. And our roadway designs are such that we're operating our vehicles in system one. That's just human nature. The only people that operate vehicles, not the only people, but examples of people who operate vehicles in a system two highly focused state are like race car drivers, pilots. I would include our transit operators because they always see me when I wave, others don't. So I'm just recommending this book, and if you don't have time to read, as many of us do not, there's also a podcast on the same subject. And so I just took a screenshot and I'll pass these around. I'll follow up to make sure everyone has the proper links. But since we all listen to podcasts via different platforms, I thought you could just take a picture of this and take it as a takeaway that you could enjoy later. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just send that around.
Thank you for that presentation and information. Now we're going to take a quick pause. Well, I shouldn't say quick. We're going to take a pause. Commissioner Pat Kemp is here. She is on the MPO board, obviously, and is the vice chair on that. And we're fortunate that she's able to come speak with us today. And for a few minutes, I don't know how long you can stay, but you're welcome to stay as long as you'd like. So I don't know if you had anything you wanted to say up front, or
I did, and there was kind of just a little error in this, didn't make my calendar. So I already left because our meeting ended, maybe the shortest meeting we've ever had at the BOCC today. And I was already home working away actually at my laptop when I was notified. So I came back down to talk to you all and just, I want to open I was supposed to be here to have conversation, but so I apologize. And thank you for inviting me. I know that this group are people that are on the front lines and are really, really helpful to educate people like me on the TPO board and to bring issues forward and to talk to people in the community, not that I don't, but that bringing just a whole vast opening of perspectives about the situations involving our transportation issues and somewhat the transit issues, but our transportation issues here in Hillsborough County. And so I really appreciate it because I know before I became the last 6 years as a commissioner, I truly was a citizen activist. And this was really the heart of what I paid attention to was transportation and transit for probably some decades. And I know how hard it is to be out there and be collecting this information and bringing it forward. So I know everyone here is very, very dedicated. I want to thank you for what you bring to the community, because without you, we would be so much less informed. I mean, I was just thinking, listening to Christina, how, she was one of the first people, well, maybe she wasn't, but there were, I could name a legacy of some people's, right, that have really, really focused on the bicycle issues in the community. I know Vision Zero has been very prominent here, and I think maybe the first Vision Zero information we ever had, I know Beth Alden was very committed to bringing that to this group, and maybe there were some other people that brought it to the group. But I think just when I started as a commissioner is maybe the first times I ever heard about Vision Zero and started looking up what it was and started becoming more knowledgeable and started hearing, as many of you already know, how we're continually at the top of the list for pedestrian, bicycle, and crash death in the nation, bar none. And I think for at least a few years, seven of the top 10 jurisdictions in the nation for that were in Florida. I remember being a bit shocked when I kind of understood that. And then year after year, when I understood it even more, that we're in that, that we have that issue here in Hillsborough County, not that every place in the nation doesn't have it, but we have it far more acutely. And it's something that, this group has worked on very, very much. So we have a fairly new TPO moving forward. And we're going to have to be looking at, I think there probably will be some changes in the agenda as we go forward, but we're just going to have to see where that lands. And I don't know if anybody wants to ask any questions at this time or.
Yeah, does anyone have any questions for the commissioner? Don't be too shy.
It's kind of very intimidating.
Yeah. Well, it's a bigger group because this is two committees to get together today because we have our joint meeting once a year. So it's a larger group than normal. Beth?
Oh, you're so brave, Beth.
Well,
And thanks for getting the ball rolling.
I'm obviously not one of the committee members. I'm just here to support, but I just really want to appreciate you coming to be part of our conversation today. We try to make an opportunity for our CAC members and our TAC members to get to know each other in a more informal format, at least once a year, because we all end up having conversations about, well, what can be done by the local governments, and what would citizens like to see done, and coming up with some pragmatic ways to move forward is, I hope, our goal. And so having you also here to champion that and champion our collaboration to find pragmatic solutions for our community is it's just so important. And you alluded to changes on our board. I think our board has been very pragmatically focused on things like good repair and safety. And I'm hoping that we will be continuing to bring forward the objective data about that to our board. We'll be continuing to focus on our performance measures, and hopefully we will be continuing to collaborate to do the most we can with the limited resources that we have.
Very limited. Unfortunately, I was interviewed at length yesterday by WUSF Radio it was like a half-hour interview, I think. And he went and asked me all these questions, and I just every time landed on underfunded transit system in the nation as far as a transit system for a metro area this size, bar none. And he was specifically asking me mostly about that. I am chair of HART. But we kept getting back to that. And then he was saying, well, how do you see getting money for that? And I didn't have, right now, there's not a lot of great options, you know, and I was trying to end at least on a note, a good note. And I'll say this too, not only do we have the people in this room and a really, as we all know, a very much broader community out there that is very, very focused and willing to devote their time, resources, attention, energy to these issues. And it just occurred to me that I was listening to someone in their 20s and they were like, I didn't know I had to go out and work for a sidewalk. You know, like, they're just learning. But I'll say this, honestly, I think this group and our resources and our efforts have gotten the word out. I do not consider the ballot initiative a loss. I was asked by reporters that. We lost by just over 1%, I think it was. And that's when people were notified at the polls not to vote on it for a day. And that's kind of with the most conservative in Hillsborough County, the most conservative leaning voters that have come out historically in a long time. And we barely lost on that issue, and it was passed by 57% before. And it was under court attack this time with a single judge that removed it, and it actually got there were actually notices at the polls for about a day saying you don't have to vote on this, and I know some people were told not to vote on it. Believe that, because I was contacted by some people at the polls. But despite that, I think it's very clear that the citizens and residents of Hillsborough County understand that we are desperately needy for funds and funding for transportation and transit in Hillsborough County. And I am really grateful to citizens. They have not had, I don't think they any longer have to be convinced of that message. I just thought this vote was amazing. The vote before was amazing. And people are really desperate to help fund transportation in Hillsborough County. So we're just going to have to find a way to get there. But I appreciate all the work y'all have done.
How long is it going to be before we bring that back?
Well, first of all, it needs a majority of the county commission to put on the ballot. But it's every 2 years that you can bring it back. I mean, and I don't mean it has to be during a main election, a gubernatorial or a presidential election when I say that.
Mr. Chairman, I think we may have some online questions from our online guests.
Can somebody, I don't know, I can't read them from here, but can somebody maybe read them?
It's Rick Fernandez.
Okay. Beth, can you
Isn't
see
anything to read? Can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Yes, go ahead, Rick.
First of all, just as a production value issue, I can barely hear our chair, Bill Roberts, when he speaks. So maybe somebody could get him a mic from earlier. I couldn't hear a word he was saying. Commissioner Kemp, good afternoon. A couple of questions. First one, procedural. Maybe I should have seen the memo already. Has the TPO board already held its leadership vote for this coming year?
No, it has not. And maybe.
And when is that scheduled?
Mm-hmm.
When is that scheduled?
Sure. The TPO officer elections are always held at the December meeting.
So that'll be next week?
What's the date of that, Beth? What's the date of that meeting?
It's a week from today.
Thank you.
Okay. Another question for Commissioner Kemp. I believe it was at the last TPO board meeting. Might have even been October. I'm not sure. There was left open for consideration in 2023 the question of the 2 lanes moving north of I-4 out to Beers and removing those lanes from the LRTP. Do you still see that as an issue to be discussed by this TPO board, or should we forget that that's even possible now?
I think that we're just going to have to see how things go with the new board.
Agreed.
Has there been any further discussion on that issue since it was raised last month?
We've not held a public meeting of the TPO board.
Right.
All right, thank you.
Okay, is that all? That's all you had? Okay. Anybody else have any questions? Beth?
If I could offer just one more thing on the topic of funding for transportation improvements. That is a very front and center topic for the TPO because we are required under federal law to have a cost feasible long-range transportation plan. Our next long-range plan update is due in just about 2 years from now, November of 2024. We are already working on the data analysis to lead us into that decision-making process. One of our major projects in the next 6 to 9 months is to update the revenue forecasts. And so we're going to be in particular reaching out to all of our jurisdictional partners to look at funding that's available for transportation and how do we project that out over the next 20 years and what does that mean? And are there any other opportunities to find funding sources for transportation? So we'll be back to the CAC with the results of that analysis. We'll be back to the board with the results of that analysis. And then that becomes one of the building blocks for the cost feasible plan that you'll see in the following year. And how do we prioritize projects for the limited dollars that are available? So this will be very top of mind for all of us here and look forward to working with all of you on that.
May I ask a question, which might be for Beth or for Commissioner Kemp? And thank you, Commissioner Kemp, for being here and for all that you do for our community. You know, sometimes when we see these numbers that come before the committees, I know I've been asked in social circles of people who don't know transportation as much as everybody does here in this room. If we reject one project, our funds, are there any circumstances where funds could be moved, say, from a roadway or highway widening project to transit? I saw something come across my social feed a week or two ago that reflected that some states are that can be done. I mean, I guess I sound like I'm grasping at straws, but is there any way to reallocate funds to transit that we aren't just, that FDOT is not allowing, or is there anything like that on the table?
It really depends on the funding source. But even in the areas where there is flexibility, and DOT is creating some more flexibility with some of their funding sources. One thing to be aware of, though, is that a lot of those funding sources are for capital investments, not for ongoing operations. So like if you want the bus to run more often or later hours or go to other locations, that's an operational expense. And we can't necessarily use a lot of those funding programs for that kind of expense.
So just to use your example, is say the Tampa, Florida Avenues BRT and light signal timing express bus route, is that a capital expense?
It has both capital and operational expenditures. So some of the capital expenditures are funded in part by the RAISE grant that DOT won for the segment that's south of MLK. North of MLK, you know, we're still looking for funding sources.
And I would just like some of the things that I've learned in my time on HART and really looking at this closely, and this might be something for people to consider. When you think, you know, about highway building or road building, you know, we're talking 100% capital costs. when you talk about transit, and it isn't because Hart is poorly managed, but we do 70% is the cost of operations, and that is a national standard. We're right on the mark. 70% is operations, 30% is capital, whether it's the buildings that we operate out of, the buses, which I think are now costing like $750,000 a piece. But 70% is operations. You think about it's easy capital. Actually, it hasn't been easy in Hillsborough County to get capital to build a school, for instance. But once you build the school, the bigger issue is the operations of the school, all the staff you have to hire there, everything you have to do. It's the same thing for our fire stations in Hillsborough County, which we're massively behind on. But once we build the fire station, the really bigger ongoing concern is the capital cost is really, we talk all the time and focus on the capital cost of transit, when truly it's operations costs that's the problem, and is the ongoing continual problem. So not to not be thinking about that, because sometimes if the agency doesn't have to fork over the capital cost and it can get matched locally in another way with the federal government, then the operations that money can be shifted and used in operations in a place like Hart. But it's, I have looked every which way to see what we could do to do better by our transit system. This has just been a massive focus for me, because as desperately as our transportation system is in general, our transit system is desperately 10 times worse off than you would ever imagine. To give you an example, here in Hillsborough County, we have 30 routes, and 19 of them are hourly routes. And the other ones are half hour or less. I mean, I think the fastest route that we have now on Nebraska Avenue, I believe, is like, it's changed back and forth a little bit, but like 15 minutes. And I'm talking about cities that you and I have all been to. And I shouldn't even think about having been in Amsterdam this summer. I won't go into that. But anyway, which basically is about the same population in the metro area, by the way, as Tampa, Hillsborough County, 1.5 million people. But the underfunding is just an extreme difficulty, and we're just, again, going to have to keep working on that. When we have other places where the standard route runs every 3 minutes, and I've been in those cities all over the place, which is kind of where we are with best practices, and we have a handful of routes that go every 15 minutes here in a major metropolitan area. It's really just shameful. It's just shameful, and we're not doing what we possibly can to help people get to work, to get to the hospital, to have alternatives to owning a car. It's all around making things very, very difficult. And the other thing I think that people rarely understand, our bus system had, when I started just 6 years ago, our ad valorem tax base for Hart, my first year, was $32 million. That gets matched by grants and other things. 32 million. I think it's gotten up to 66 million now. Historically, for decades and decades and decades, it's been, super underfunded. But one thing I said, and I'll say it to this group, the cost of roads has grown astronomically. We talk in the county commission about widening Lithia Pinecrest Road, 3 miles long. We're just talking about widening, but we're talking about $40 million a mile. We're talking about Van Dyke Road, again, widening it, and we're now talking about 40 million or more a mile, and we haven't even begun to even look at the right-of-way that we're buying. But I'll ask you all this question, because I was kind of taken aback when when I really started comparing all these numbers. But y'all know about the connection, and this isn't saying that this shouldn't have been, criticizing it, but the connection between the Leroy Selman and I-4, it's 1 mile long. So, it's a very infrastructure, heavy, intense project. And maybe the engineers in here who know shouldn't go for this one, but does anybody want to venture how much that cost? It was done in 2008. It was 600 million, which when I was thinking it through, it was enough to make up the ad valorem tax for Hart for 18 years. And that was 1 mile. So, and the reason I started thinking about this is because people kept saying to me, oh, transit, it's so costly. It's so, and even though it's invested in operations and it is costly, I mean, we really need to be thinking about how we can do this and how we can move forward. And like I said, I don't think I need to convince you so much, but I like to let people think about it a little. And I don't need to convince apparently the residents of Hillsborough County either. We're like, for the most part, we're all on the same page here. So I'll be thinking hard, and if anyone comes up with brilliant ways to get us more resources, I'll be all here, and would love to hear from everyone.
Yep, go ahead. You may want to pull the mic over there.
Yeah. Thank you, Commissioner, for coming, and thank you for the support of these two groups and the citizens that you put forth in your terms as commissioner. My question kind of goes to what you just said, and I wonder if you think there would be a possibility when the CIT comes up for renewal of earmarking some of those funds, which are badly needed for schools and fire stations and other projects. Is there a mechanism by which some of those funds could be earmarked for transit?
And again, and this is a growing question, we have a half-cent CIT, community investment tax now, that's been there for 30 years. It expires in 2027. It's half-cent, and it's gone to pay for, maybe, would you like, what are the different categories? I know the Bucks is always the big one that everybody, but it's a very small part of it.
Was a piece of it. It's been used for jails. It's been used for fire stations. It's been used for transportation, roads. I believe some of it's gone to Hart at different points. Libraries. I mean, a whole host of public infrastructure projects.
And I can tell you one of the things too, when it was first passed, and I think that was like 1990, must have been 1997 because it expires in 2027. And if you were around here, every school that I saw, I live near Hillsborough High School, the entire property was covered in portables. People were outraged and angry, and there was no school building. We were just so behind the curve. It was incredible. And one of the reasons for that, frankly, I believe, was the lack of impact fees here that were $196 as compared to Manatee and Polk and Pasco, which was $4,000. Yeah, we've been historically behind forever, and that wasn't remedied till a decade later in terms of that. So what that was doing is we were paying to expand the schools when developers and impact fees, the typical thing, especially when you're slammed with blistering growth, it has some responsibility towards that. Didn't have it. We have remedied that on the parts of schools. We have remedied, in fact, I have to say, I've personally brought forward impact fees for like big, comparable to Manatee, Polk, and Pasco impact fees with schools, with roads, with sewer and wastewater, with fire stations, because we were so far behind on those. But that being said, maybe we won't have to use the huge amounts that we had to use in the past in the CIT. That was my point for schools.
Right.
And there might be certainly other opportunities, but as I said before, and you can shift, it could cover some capital. I think hopefully we could have some investment in our transit system for that, because it was, I think, left out the last time, or else we wouldn't have a 70-year-old truck station for our main headquarters that is leaking and flooding. And that is, I mean, among other things that Hart has. But so hopefully, I think that might be something that could be worked as part of the solution. And again, if you did that, you could, shift some to operations. But frankly, Hart's capital funding is so little a part of their budget now, because they can't fund it, that it won't even help that much. But I will never look a gift horse in the mouth, and we will do everything we can in every possible way to get the funding to Hart.
And I believe that takes a vote too, so that would have to, similar to what just did not pass a month ago or so, that would have to go to the people as well.
You're absolutely, well, first of all, it would have to be support of the county commission
Right,
which
is how that starts.
Yes, and then you put it on the ballot, and it would have to get the support of people. I remember the first time we ever did it, it failed. And then they tried alliance between supporting the Bucks and supporting schools. And I think it just barely passed at that time, but it was that's what was done back then. So maybe that can be, we'll have to see. That's a half cent now. And so we'll have to see where that goes or how it goes.
Yeah, and most of that, my understanding, is committed or spent already. So there's not a lot left. And, there's, as the commissioner said, there's only a few more years left in actually collecting the funds, but, a lot of it's been bonded. And so there's not a lot of projects that you could do with what's left in that.
Oh, right. In the intervening years you're talking
Correct.
about.
Like in the next 3 or 4 years.
And truly, I was an aide to Kathy Castor when she was a county commissioner here in 2003 to 2006. And so the CIT was only passed in like 1997. And I kind of remember by the time I came here, just like a few years later, it was all bonded out. But there's been some opportunities as it's increased a little bit for different commissions to take some, to look at that as a source. I think initially it was, all spent for quite a bit of time, but now there's been some openings here in the last couple of years. But I think at this time it's probably all committed for the future years.
Yeah, I believe so.
Mhm.
I believe so. Okay. Any other questions? Anyone? Yes.
You guys can hear me now. To my favorite county commissioner, I have 2 questions. If you know the answer, because I'm just curious. First, how much percentage of the budget do actual fares make? I'm sure it's astronomically low, but I was curious about that.
Yeah, I think it's like 12%, which is again a standard, but it's a little different. If, for instance, there's a few places in the country that are very different by that, and one of them is New York City, where it's like 40%. Because of the density and intensity again. But I think typically it's something between 12 or 10 and 20%. And I think we fall into a very standard, like 12%. The other thing about collecting fares, just there's a lot of cost involved in collecting fares, just slowing down the buses and boarding, some safety issues in terms of the drivers and operators. And then there's just the cost of the machinery and the auditing and everything else in collecting fares. But that's about standard.
And the other question I had was, how do the funding troubles that Hart has compared to PSTA?
Well, Heart is unique in the state of Florida. And I did not understand this when I started. I kept thinking, why is Heart so poor? Why is it so underfunded? Why is it? So I started doing my own research to understand what is going on and why Heart is in the spot that it's in historically. And the reason or part of the history of Heart was bought apparently like many of the transit systems. It was a bankrupt transit system, bus system in Tampa that some commissioners, city councilors got together and purchased it out of bankruptcy so that there would be there would be something operating. And they designated under state statute an ad valorem property tax to support Heart of 0.5% and an independent board that has city councilors, county commissioners, and community people by designation on the board. There's only one other board that exists like that in the state of Florida, and that's Pinellas. How do the other transportation, huge ones, Miami-Dade, Broward, Palm Beach, Orange County, Jacksonville, I mean, all the ones you can think of. And there's some exceptions to this with Orlando and Orange, which I won't go into. But every one of those, instead of being an independent transit agency that's done like this with an ad valorem, tax right on your bill, dedicated to the agency. Every other one in the state of Florida is a county department. It's run by a staff in the county who answers to the county administrator as their boss. And believe it or not, actually, that's the way airports, like the big airports, Miami-Dade and Fort Lauderdale, the same thing, they're county departments. And the ports are county departments. The Orlando International Airport is under the county. That's how it operates. And so the funding is out of the county-wide funds to the point of hundreds of millions of dollars. There's only 2 agencies in the state of Florida, that transit agencies, that don't operate that way. That's Hillsborough and Pinellas. We parallel each other. We do this ad valorem property tax. The state of Florida allows you to do, who knows, that will change, but, and we're the only 2 that do it. Up to 3 mills. And when they originally passed this in the late 70s, Pinellas, PSTA did one mill. Hillsborough did a 0.5 mil. And so in order to change that and up that at all, you have to get the Heart Board to approve it, the county commission to approve it, and then it would have to go on the ballot. And it would not bring in the resources that a sales tax would bring, and it would not be an independent, I think if you can get different streams of resource to your agency, that would be the way to do it, not just depend on one or the other. But we are stepped at a 0.5 mil, whereas Pinellas, they did a full mill. And about a few years ago, they had been operating under a 0.5 mil, but they didn't need to. Their board could just vote on that, their transit board. So they did. They put up to, I think, 3/4 or maybe 1 mil. I'm not quite got the story on that. But what you have to understand too is that Pinellas is one of the densest counties in the nation, and it's 1/3 the physical size of Hillsborough. And they even have many more resources than we do here in Hillsborough County. So that's the sad history of our underfunding. And gives you some perspective on it. But we are very much, even compared to PSDA, our resources are very limited.
Okay, anyone else?
Can I depress you any further?
Commissioner, maybe you should give us some words of encouragement.
I know. That's why we desperately need, a sales tax source. That's why we desperately need CIT. That's why we desperately need other resources for years, my first 2 years of the term, I got the county to contribute $2.5 million to HART, and we improved 4 routes in frequency. But that only lasted for 2 years when the board voted that down. But there's all different sources that we could look to. We'll just have to, I think, start building all those possibilities.
Johnny?
Commissioner, just one real quick question. I was wondering if you could offer one piece of advice to the committee members for how they might be able to use this forum to better communicate their wants to you and to the TPO board.
I know we have reports, but and I'm really deeply grateful when I find out what the votes are here, when I'm informed about it. And I think also if you're able to, even independently, there's nothing that stops. I know we have your reports, but for any of you who feel strongly about any issue, if you have the opportunity to, and now we're making it available virtually to speak at public comment, to contact commissioners independently and let them know, send emails, call. I'm really open to that and search for it. So I appreciate that. And, any of the other feedback that I get, even, from in any way, it's always good. And says, thanks for asking.
Okay. Anyone else? Seeing anyone online? I can't see the chat up there.
I'm not seeing any questions in the chat and no hands raised.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. Well, Commissioner, we appreciate you coming today and taking some time and coming back. And it was a very quick meeting today, quick as I've seen in a long time as well.
Yes.
So we very much appreciate you being here, sharing some of your knowledge and wisdom with us, and taking the time. So thank you.
And again, I thank everybody here for the incredible effort that you all make to, bring these issues to us to meet and focus on them. There's very little in Hillsborough County that's more important than the transit and transportation system in my mind, and that needs resources. I know there's lots of things needing resources. We're at a critical place now, so we have to figure out how to get over this. And more on that, I'll let you know more as I figure out more. But the status right now is what it is.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time. Okay.
Vice Chair Williams. Hello.
Well, yes.
Hi. For a point of order, I want to make sure that the TAC has 9 members in person.
Okay. I think we did. Well, he just stepped out. We did have one more that showed up after we did the count.
Okay.
Just stepped out for a second. I think he had to take a phone call, but
not a problem. Would you mind calling for a vote of consent for remote participation, as you do have remote members?
Well, maybe could we do a roll call? Can you do a roll call of the TAC since we need to determine if we have a quorum?
Yes, I can.
Okay, thank you.
Jeff Sims is excused. Is Michelle Jenkins there? Mike Williams.
Yes.
Brian McCarthy.
Here.
Jonathan Scott. Chris Jaden.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Michael English.
Present.
Online, correct? Robert Frey or Anna Quinones. Clay Hollis.
He is here. He just stepped out.
He's the one who stepped out, right? Okay. And I saw Gina Evans as online. Yes. Leland Dykes or Marcelo Taverni.
I think Bob Campbell is here for them. I think, didn't we have a change? Is that official, Wade, or?
I will check on that, but I know that Bob is representing us.
Right.
I've got it noted. Thank you. And Jesus, I believe, is online.
Yes, present.
Thank you. And is Julie Ham or Mark Hudson there? Okay, and Laura Bauk?
I'm here.
Thank you. Jay Collins is online, I believe.
I am indeed.
Thank you. And Jennifer Malone is in person.
Present.
Nicole Sutton,
Present.
Sarah Caper,
Here.
Richard Ray. Thank you. All right, that gives us 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. Yes, you do have 9 in person. So would you mind calling for a vote of consent for remote participation?
Okay, so for the TAC, we need a motion for, to allow for remote participation. Do we have a motion?
Laura back, I'll make the motion.
Jonathan Scott, second.
Who was the second?
Jonathan Scott.
Thank
Okay,
you.
so we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Okay,
And I'd like to do the
now
same
we
for the
can get on.
CAC.
Thank you. We can get on to regular business now.
May I do the same roll call for CAC, please?
Oh, certainly.
Bill Roberts,
Here?
Rick Fernandez is virtual, correct?
I'm here virtual, yes.
Okay, David Bailey, Carolyn Brown, Hoyt Prindle,
Here.
Miaza Morrison, I believe she is also virtual. Yes, I do see her. Aya Yasin,
Here.
Steve Hollenkamp, Nicole Rice, Christina Costa,
Present.
Artie Fryer, he is also virtual. Nicholas Glover, I believe virtual as well. Don Skelton,
Here.
Ed Majewski,
Here.
Sharon Gamond, believe she's also virtual. Terrence Trott,
Yep, here virtually.
Drew Newman,
Good afternoon.
Joshua Frank.
Present.
Okay, I believe that will give us 7 in person. Johnny, can you verify that, please?
I'm only seeing 6. I see Bill, Hoyt, Aya, Ed, Don, and Christina Costa in person.
That's what I have as well. So the CAC does not have an in-person quorum.
Okay.
I'd like to make a motion the CAC accept votes from online attendees. Is that possible, or is it moot because we don't have a quorum?
Without a quorum, we really can't accept a motion,
Oh,
but
sorry.
thank you. Yeah, and we'll convert the action items for the CAC into recommendations and just pass our comments along. So feel free to comment. Okay, go ahead, Mike.
Okay, first item on the agenda, I guess would be for the TAC, and that's approval of the minutes from the November 7th meeting. If everyone had a chance to look at those, or are there any comments or changes needed for the minutes? If not, can we have a motion?
Jonathan Scott, motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you.
Laura back, second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries unanimously. I guess I don't know if you want to have any discussion about your minutes, but.
No, we'll just defer
you won't
action.
have a vote. Okay.
Yeah,
no
thank you,
problem.
Mike. Yeah.
Then we'll get to the regular agenda, the action items. First item is the Tampa School Transportation Safety Study, and I believe Lisa Silva is stepping up to the podium to speak to that. Thank you, Lisa.
Right. And our HTV guy, can you make the
PowerPoint show up on the screen for the at-home viewers? It is? Okay, awesome. Okay, Lisa Silva, I'm gonna change the mood of the room, show you some exciting stuff we're working on that we still don't have money to fund, but okay. So I'll remind both committees that I came to you and gave you a status update last month. In the interest of time, and because you did get a detailed presentation, and everything I'm covering today is on the website in detail, and you have this handy dandy little executive summary of what I'm presenting and asking your action on today at your place. I'm going to go lightning fast. So here we go. We did a lot of work over the last 10 years. As you know, we focused in and evaluated all of the schools, but then did top 8 for the city of Tampa as requested by them. Equity and safety were our major focus this time. And then we added some encouragement and education highlights because we cannot engineer our ways out of these problems. So, and then we built on the school safety study that many of you are aware of or participated in 2018, identified physical improvements again, then added that encouragement focus. That's what I'm going to focus on today, is doing those top 8 schools. So did evaluation criteria. There's a whole methodology online, looked at school age children's crashes, school age times, free and reduced lunch, helped inform our equity decisions. These are the top 8 that were evaluated. So some of the ones that when we re-ranked everything were still leftovers from our top 12 last time, but they got pulled off because the jurisdictions are working on implementing them. It just takes a lot of time and funding and time for those crash stats to go down. We asked every single parent to provide input through a school survey again. And we took that information along with a survey, which this is like a word cloud of every single principal, and asked what they thought. Not surprisingly, school circulation and traffic are the significant issues. We took that, went out and did field reviews, rode our bicycles around, evaluated everything, saw the lack of infrastructure improvements, and then we developed recommendations and maps. And then we took those back out to the principals and asked for their feedback. They helped critique it at every step of the way. The stakeholder group also provided that input. Here you'll see our little ideas are color coded. Black's informational, purple is speed related because speed was a significant factor. Blue is behavior. We have some misbehaving parents, etc. out there. And then green's incomplete infrastructure. I'm going to highlight West Tampa Elementary in a little detail and show you what we did for each school, and then just highlights for the remaining 7. So we did summaries and surveys, asked the principals for their feedback and did a little charrette with them. Then we came up with this list of recommendations. These maps in detail are on the website as well, so you can zoom in and see them. So we developed improvement concepts. Some of the improvements are shown here to illustrate the design intent. A lot of the ideas were related in this case for West Tampa to drop off and pick up on Walnut Street. We showed the installation of an all-way stop at the intersection of Tampania and Walnut, potential for speed tables on Walnut, and then delineation of the school drop-off zone in a Paint Saves Lives type of project. Very exciting. We've had a Girl Scout approach us to do a Scout project for implementation of that, and the principal's been very responsive and wants to implement their school new school logo there. Here at Shaw, we you guys saw the presentation of all the things going on with Fowler Avenue. That stuff was reviewed and helped inform what we observed out at Shaw. They've got misbehaving parents and infrastructure issues, and then some resources that we saw, like they were the ones I call the cone fatalities. They're cones for just getting run over by the parents, and they're in disintegration. This one also paired nicely with our Safe Access to Parks project, Wade's Green Artery and the 15th Street Vision Zero corridor studies that the county and the city are working on. So we've got a lot of great synergy fact, I hear it's part of the Safe Streets for All grant. So that's very exciting. Here we have Potter Elementary. So the most transformative recommendation is concerning Cayuga Street, which belongs along the southern edge of the school in a one-way westbound from 34th to 31st. Several locations for raised crosswalks and rapid rectangular flashing beacons were identified. For Orange Grove Middle, we identified several opportunities to narrow travel lanes and add bicycle facilities to the roadways and or street parking. There were several locations where new crosswalks were proposed or an all-way stop. And these will all help us protect our most vulnerable, the students. Here we have Jefferson High School in the Westshore area. There are a lot of roadway system improvements being identified in the Westshore Master Plan, the Tampa Bay Next projects, the City of Tampa project. So all those were coordinated and folded in. And then we added a few additional things like that. It's a complete nightmare when the buses are being released out on Cypress. So we have recommendations there. Westshore Alliance is already excited to help us implement some of the low-cost, low-hanging fruit recommendations around the schools with their members. So that's very exciting. Here we have Just, Stewart, and Blake. We were looked at it as kind of, they're all near each other. Their issues impact each other. So as a campus approach to it. So a lot of circulation issues, even some like school policy. So we went beyond, you know, your engineering recommendations. So this one of these is a magnet on a teeny tiny school with a big, huge redevelopment coming in across the way. We're like, maybe you can evaluate the student population and turn this back into a neighborhood school, given the context, you know. So ideas like that were shared. Here's the encouragement and education things. We have really great ideas about communicating it equitably, prioritizing the underserved schools, reducing the barriers and making everything free, combining all of the E's into our recommendations. There's a huge list in the report, so you can go check that out. This is illustrating that new little logo we want to install around West Tampa. Helping our principals, we go to one school, they'd have great resources, go to another school, they had none. Resource officers had access to certain things in one school, not others. Some principals brand new, knew a lot of stuff, some not. We're like, let's give them a resource. Who do you call? So you have street limbs covering the school zone, flashing lights, who do you call? So we're like, great, let's make a magnet for their filing cabinets or a poster and give them this resource, because they don't know who to call for a walking school bus. They don't know who to call given the roadways owned by the county versus the city versus the Department of Transportation. So all of that is on our resource here that we are working with the school district to help them roll out and distribute. The other thing is these are kind of imagined as yard signs and or helping inform the geofencing project that we want to do as a pilot in and around. So you're driving through the area, you experience a school zone, you would get, you know, notice about that. Then also you like have those millions of car lines that are backing up into our infrastructure, our arterials and collectors. Let's incentivize and get them off and out of that car line. So working with the green team, sustainability teams is one of the exciting miscellaneous things we discovered along the way. The geofencing, we found portable speed humps. Again, nobody has a lot of money. They're $675 on Amazon. We're like, hey, let's buy a few of those and try them where we've got these recommendations, see if they don't work, maybe install them just during the school year, pull them up outside the school year, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So that's my flash briefing of the school safety study.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Any questions or comments from either committee?
I do. I just wanted to ask, I noticed that in the executive summary, it talked about creating a stakeholder group. I'm just wondering, has that started or what's the vision or timeline for that?
We use a stakeholder group to help inform the development of this. And then after our last school safety study, one of the things, lovely byproducts of that was that the school district formed their own site circulation committee, and they use the recommendations of the past study, any issues that come up with principals that they identify, new schools get reviewed, and people like Bob Campbell and other local jurisdictional representatives get invited when they're working on a school in their jurisdiction or along one of their roadways. And then, the community traffic safety team helps inform our school's transportation issues. Anybody's welcome to participate in that. Those are some stakeholder groups that also then help inform school transportation year round.
Okay, that's great. And I have one more question too, if I may. So I just wanted to ask too, I know that it says that in some of the study findings, it said that there were other like non-transportation related issues that relate to like community safety and things like that. Just wondering how that, I haven't read the full report yet, so I will after this, but I'm just wondering, like, how does something like that fit in? Does that kind of go back to those stakeholder groups to kind of begin to incorporate that, or what happens with that info?
Well, like the Hart bus stop outside of Jefferson is, we're like, oh, look, we can improve access to that. And some students are using it, but the general community uses that. Some things that were observed in the Westshore area are outside really kind of this purview, but they got shared with the members over there, things like that. Or education things gets shared with the school district. We're like, oh, like Jefferson, why do you have a school that doesn't have access to the school? You have sidewalks outside the school, you have sidewalks by the door of the school, but to get from the sidewalk to the front door, you have to walk in the driveway to get there. Well, that's, let's change the design of schools and not have schools designed without having to go into the big use area to get on site. I get security with the fencing, the river walk over by Stewart and Just and Blake. Yeah.
Okay, Christine.
Hey, Lisa, this is just great material. So good job and a lot of hard work, I can tell, went into it. I want to share with the group that on the last page where Just Elementary is indicated, the number 4, that was just completed this last weekend. Thanks in partnership with you and also the nonprofit Walk Bike Tampa. So there was a crosswalks to classroom painted intersection just this last weekend. So all of you can stop by there and have a look at what that looks like, and it's really fantastic. I have a question for you though too. You said we did some education and outreach because we can't engineer our way out of all these, or what did you mean by that?
Well, when we have misbehaving parents parking on the sidewalk, there's not an engineering solution to that. That's a behavior thing. So we need to educate and encourage the parents not to do that, not to block the infrastructure that is there for the students to use. So this study had a larger focus on encouragement and education tasks, as well as engineering solutions like crosswalks, sidewalk gaps, and raised intersections.
So I guess an engineering example in that case would be a curb or some landscaping rocks that would prevent a vehicle, a person from trying to pull on. It looks like there's no curb there. It's just a little patch of grass at the same level as the street. So I guess there might be some engineering solutions, but not available to us. Or
right, maybe I didn't pick the perfect example, but yes, okay. That you can do that. But then also engineering solutions like curb extensions, et cetera, are very costly, so right. If we can do it by telling them, don't do that, your children will get kicked out of school or something, I'm being extreme. We can encourage better behavior without having to invest a fortune, of which we don't have.
Thank you.
Oh, and then shout out back because that little painted lane that we're proposing by West Tampa, I've learned that Roosevelt Elementary is proposing something similar, and they're going to be out there painting on December 10th and 17th. So really great stuff going on. That's not just budgets having to implement. So we really appreciate our advocacy groups partnering with us.
Okay. Any other questions? Anyone online have any questions? Okay, hearing none. Lisa, what is the motion you're looking for today? To accept the report and pass it to the board, or what's the?
for the TAC, since you have quorum present, if you guys make a motion to recommend the TPO board approve the report when they meet and take action. And then CAC can I'll take all the comments that are shared here today and I'll get communicated.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other comments before we get to a motion for the TAC? Yes.
Yeah, I had a quick question. How far out did you go in terms of looking at improvements from the school?
Oh, distance-wise?
Distance-wise.
Well, because state law has the limits at 2 miles. That's the captionment boundary for the alternative transportation that we're looking at. But we looked at anything influencing the schools. And when we go out, we caught a few other schools as freebies, and got recommendations for them because in Tampa, they're pretty tight. The schools and some of the private or charter ones overlapped our area, but that was the focus area. 2 miles.
Okay. I don't see anyone else. With that, if we could have a motion from the TAC.
Laura Bach, I'll make a motion for the board to approve this wonderful plan.
Thank you.
Brian McCarthy, seconds.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion before we vote? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Anyone opposed? Okay, motion carries unanimously. I don't know if the CAC, did you guys want to add any more comments since you're not voting?
No,
I mean, everybody got the chance to speak, but.
Our members have had a chance to ask questions, and thank you, Linda, for the presentation. We'll include this in our comments for our report. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. Okay, thanks, Lisa. Next item on the agenda is a tip amendment for the Westshore Interchange Major Reconstruction Project. And Roger, I believe, is here from the TPO staff.
Good afternoon, committee members. I'm Roger Matthew, TPO staff. We have an amendment for you today on the Westshore Interchange Major Reconstruction. This amendment was requested by FDOT to show an increase of $71 million in funds for the right-of-way. There will be no new acquisitions of any right-of-way, but the money will be used to account for increases due to real estate prices and inflation. We brought a different amendment to you back in September of this year that reflected some cost savings that made the right-of-way total $304 million. This amendment we're bringing to you now will show a 19% increase, putting the right-of-way total at just roughly $375 million. And for the public outreach, we published details in our monthly newsletter, made social media posts, published a notice on our website, and posted signs at the same location as the prior amendment. And today we're recommending that you approve this amendment to the fiscal year 23-27 TIP and recommend approval to the TPO board. And any questions or discussions?
Thank you for the presentation. Any questions from either committee? No, everybody's kind of shy today, okay? Yep, turn your mic there.
Roger, if I may, you said there's no additional right-of-way being acquired, so this change represents mostly cost increases. Some of it is right-of-way, correct?
Right. That's correct, yes.
Okay.
Yes, so the $71 million is strictly right-of-way phase. So the PD&E has already been funded and completed, and that $70 million is just for right-of-way. It's not going into construction phase or anything beyond right-of-way at this time. Connor McDonald for the record.
Does that mean it's all for right-of-way?
So the entire total, this $371 million, is the total for both PD&E and right-of-way acquisition.
Okay.
If you can go back a slide, I can tell you the exact dollar amount of that right of way. So the right of way would be 145, about 200 million.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Yes.
Christina Costa from the CIC asking, you mentioned that you had come to us in September, so just a couple months ago, and reflected there'd been some cost savings, if I understood you correctly. And so is this the last of the right of way? Do you predict that other expenses will also need to be adjusted and increased going forward, or is this kind of the last of what needed to happen?
I think, excuse me, I think this will be the last, but I'll defer that question to Johnny.
Yeah, Christine, thanks for that question. As far as we know, this is the last one. We don't plan out TIP amendments in the future. DOT came to us just about a month ago and said that as they were getting ready to execute some agreements, they noticed that property values had increased considerably. So they're passing along the request for the TIP amendment to add those funds to make sure that the project doesn't fall behind schedule.
Johnny, hang on one second. Johnny, do you know when the land acquisition will be complete so that that'll kind of be locked up and finalized?
No, we requested that info from DOT a couple times and they weren't able to give us exact dates or even estimated dates. The right-of-way team is responsible for that and they didn't share any info with us.
Okay. And when's the construction funded? Do you know what year that is? And maybe it's probably up there. I just can't.
I don't know off the top of my head if anyone has the TIP open.
Yes, Connor McDonald, TPO staff. This is a complete assessment of that project, the lower screenshot. So right now there's not construction funding allocated to this project.
Okay, thank you. Hey, I think you were next, sorry.
No, thank you, because you asked kind of the similar questions to what I was about
Okay.
to ask. So I want to see, so why are we updating, okay. What year is the right of way phase? What year are you proposing the amendment to be for? What fiscal year is it? And if that is the year, like, what if there was a crash in the next year or two? Are we going to amend it back to use that funds for other phases or other projects?
So right now, again, Connor McDonald, TPO staff, the 145 million in fiscal year 23 will be until next September, I believe, or next June.
Next June. So it's fiscal year 23?
Yes, and then there's
Which is current
also
year.
46 million in fiscal year 24. So if that amount does change, like you said, if the market did crash, then it would come back in our next TIP cycle.
Okay, but we are in fiscal year 23, right? So they're going to spend it before June of this year.
So the 145 million is allocated. Right.
Okay, so that means right of way is going to be this year. They're going to purchase right of way now.
Yes.
And you're saying that what fiscal year is the PD&E?
So the preliminary engineering was before fiscal year 23. So I believe it was fiscal year 21 or fiscal year 22. The preliminary engineering.
Oh, so it's already under design. So it's finalizing design?
So the preliminary engineering has been completed, yes. As far as I know, that's the money has been spent for preliminary engineering.
You typically, they'll at least start the land acquisition when the design is complete or well underway. And that's when they set the final requirements. I mean, during the PD&E, they set sort of tentative land that they'll need, but then they finalize it in the design, and that's what they buy off of. And Johnny, I think, mentioned that, some of the current contracts seem like they're higher than, so
Yeah.
it sounds like the design is nearly complete, if not complete.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Chair, Mr. Fernandez has a question.
Okay, Rick?
Thank you. Sound check. I guess you can hear me because I can hear the echo back.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I just want to be absolutely sure here. The money that we're talking about now would be money that is appropriated funding the portion of the Westshore Interchange that has now been promoted, for lack of a better term, to Table 1 of the TIP. Is that correct? My understanding is that there are portions of the Westshore Interchange that are still in Table 2, and there is a portion of first phase that's in Table 1. So this money is for the Phase 1, Table 1 portion of the Westshore Interchange. Is that correct?
Connor, do you know?
Yes, I'm pulling it up right now. I believe it wouldn't move into Table 1 until we see that construction funding, and I just want to make sure for you that that I'm accurate in that. Give me 1 second.
Rick, yeah, this is Johnny Wong. Yeah, so on the TIP, Table 1, it's the very last page of that table. It's identified as Westshore Interchange preliminary phase. I think that is the phase that we're talking about with this potential TIP amendment coming toward you, or coming for you.
Okay, and so this is a portion of the Westshore Interchange project that is considered to be beyond the point of no return, to use the FDOT phrase of the hour. Is that correct?
Yeah, Rick, this is beyond design.
Okay. That's confirmed through you, Dr. Wong. Is there anybody else that's got a say in that at this juncture, at this meeting, or can I take that to the bank?
Well, the TPO board approved it at the TIP hearing this past year.
Right.
If that's what you're asking.
As part of Table 1.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Okay, any other questions or discussion? Okay, with that, if the TAC, if we could have a motion. Yeah, make sure you use your mic.
Move approval.
Thank you. That was Clay.
Clay House.
Jennifer Malone, I'll second that.
Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, any other discussions? Okay, with that, we'll take a vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, motion carries unanimously. Any other comments the CAC would like to add? No, I think you guys had opportunity to ask. Okay, thank you. Appreciate the presentation, Roger.
Thank you.
The next item is the freight resilience and supply chain study. And okay.
So I'm Allison Ye, TPO staff, and I'm the project manager for the study. But before, as we're getting going, I just wanted to, since CAC and TAC members are all here, thank you very much for giving us initial feedback in the study. We really got some good guidance from you and took it back to revisit the report and recommendations. So that's what part of what you will be seeing today. And as you know, freight and supply chain resiliency is a newer topic in general, specifically freight resilience. So this is our first study. We're trying to understand how to prepare and strengthen supply chains in Hillsborough County and from a broader perspective as a first step. And what we're hoping these recommendations you'll see do today is to give us the right direction for implementation and future mitigation projects. So we know that we can't just look at supply chains in a vacuum, but it's really the goal of the overall well-being of the community. So that's what we're seeing today. And I know we're short on time, so I'm gonna turn it over to our consultant from AECOM who will present the study to you. Jason, do you have control of the slides?
I do.
Okay, great.
See it move? Can you hear me okay? Audio check. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So my name is Jason Smeek. I'm VP of Global Supply Chain and Logistics with AECOM. I lead all of our supply chain advisory functions globally for the company. And one of the areas that's very important to me is the area of supply chain resiliency. And You know, we all heard about supply chain issues during the pandemic, but certainly other examples abound. And frankly, these issues that have happened over the last decade or so have really brought supply chains to the forefront and started to inform the public of the value of supply chains and how really it impacts all of our lives and our well-being. A good example of this is Hurricane Katrina in 2005. During that event, 24 to 28 feet of floodwater occurred in the urban area of New Orleans, which really caused a lot of issues from a supply chain perspective as well. Perishable goods, became unusable. People didn't have access to water or basic utilities. Businesses shut down, and medical supplies and other care were not available for the public. These all have to do with supply chains in some way or form. Another example is recently, thank goodness it wasn't a direct hit on to the Tampa, city of Tampa and Hillsborough County, but the Hurricane Ian impacts and cutting off the Sanibel Causeway as an example showcase that infrastructure and the resiliency of infrastructure is really critical to the ability to move goods, to connect communities, and to provide basic required goods and services. So why are supply chains relevant? Well, nearly everything we have in our possession, everything that we consume, everything that we interact with is delivered or produced by a supply chain. And it's important because supply chains are the networks that help us create livable, prosperous, and resilient communities. And this is part of the reason why we here in Hillsborough County have studied this topic. For example, one of the things that is important to understand about supply chains is that really if we have very resilient, equitable, sustainable communities under normal conditions, the more resilient that our workplaces, that our overall supply chain transportation networks and supply chains in general then would be. And so it's important to think holistically about our infrastructure and our capabilities as a county to support supply chains. So I'll give you an example of what a supply chain really is. We've got an example here of a simple example of a supply chain of Plant City strawberries. These strawberry plants come in from northern states via truck. They're then planted, prepared. There's a lot of inputs that go into these, such as fertilizers, water, energy, right? There's machinery that help cultivate this. And then they're harvested, they're packed into boxes, packaging, right? And then trucked to a storage center or warehouse that is climate controlled, also called cold storage. These then are trucked to a distribution center. They're then taken to a supermarket where then they are ultimately purchased and then consumed. And then there's of course a waste process there for packaging and other things after that. So this gives you a sense of, just for this one example, of what a supply chain looks like from input to the consumption or waste phase, and how many different pieces go into that process. So what were the study objectives of our study here? Well, we identified key supply chains in Hillsborough County and looked at how they could be impacted or disrupted by certain disaster scenarios. And really what we wanted to do was look at 5 different supply chains of commodities and services, map those, look at the impacts of certain disaster scenarios to them to identify potential supply chain vulnerabilities due to disasters or disruptions from those scenarios and hazards, and then identify, from that, what kind of recommendations exist. And really these recommendations are more high level. They identify areas of opportunity of improvement, specific projects that will be needed, or research areas to balance freight access, community impacts, bicycle pedestrian safety, and resiliency to address community needs. And a lot of these areas really need to be assessed further. The intent was here to identify those locations for potential further assessment or potential infrastructure improvements. And what I'll mention too is that some of the feedback we received in other conversations and also presentations of this material was that there really needs to be, during those assessments and any follow-on activity of this study, an identification of the interactivity to the community, as well as incorporating designs that balance, Mission Zero, designs that will be in line with the Florida Department of Transportation District's 7's freight roadway design considerations as an example. So that was heard loud and clear, and I think that's pretty clear in our outputs that there are a lot of opportunities here to make the communities surrounding freight activity also more resilient. So let's talk about the timeline here. We had a timeline starting in about the February-March timeframe of this year, identifying through the use of our experience, through the use of an academic kind of research of case studies and utilizing FEMA and other sources, an assessment of what these disaster scenarios could be, as well as the commodities and services that would be most helpful to study. Task 2 in March through July was really looking at the commodity flows themselves. So taking that input to consumption view and mapping those through the use of data and other sources, and identifying kind of what the analysis points and the methodology was, and then the assessment of those flows. During that time frame, very importantly, we had a lot of outreach, continuous outreach with key agencies. We had private stakeholders and public to understand really what the impacts were and get examples, as well as vet our thinking around the commodities and services and the disaster scenarios that were selected. We did 7 stakeholder small group interviews. We also discussed with the CDC of Tampa, the Corporation to Develop Communities, as well as the University Area Community Development Corporation, had focus groups there, and then 7 stakeholder individual interviews related to specific commodities and services for further input and vetting of our maps that we had developed. Task 3 is the recommendations, basically from May till today. Hillsborough County Local Mitigation Strategy Working Group, as well as the One Bay Livable Communities Working Group, were also engaged throughout this process. And really the intent here was to utilize as many sources as we could to identify those impacts and identify recommendations from our activities. I won't go into a ton of detail here, but I will cover this as we go through the next few slides. But this is our supply chain disruption methodology for assessment. We took basically literature and case studies, as well as FEMA guidance, stakeholder and community input and data, utilized that then to identify the commodity supply chains that we were assessing. Also from that then derived those supply chain enablers. And you can think of these as those that support supply chain activity, such as workforce, financial flows, supply chain partners, transportation, utility are 2 very critical ones. And then looked at the disaster scenarios on top of those commodities, supply chains, and the maps and the data that we had, as well as modeling, observed those impacts and then defined actionable results. So we started with our literature and case studies. I'll give a couple examples of those. You know, the LMS, we looked at, very importantly, the Supply Chain Resiliency Guide from FEMA and Department of Homeland Security, which is centering around how to assess supply chains and how to engage the community in that input process. Importantly, we also utilize Community Lifelines Implementation Toolkit, which identifies those that are critical to well-being of communities, those commodities that are necessary to maintain or to immediately reestablish in the case of a disaster or disruption. We also took stakeholder and community input, as was mentioned. A lot of great insights here from communities of different types, incorporating what was experienced, for example, during the pandemic with regards to accessibility to goods and services, also impacts of transportation and other supply chain enablers to the ability, for example, to provide a workforce during these times, or be able to commute to work and then actually perform services to support the supply chain. And then we also utilized the HAZUS and Project Phoenix models. This is the more quantitative side of it. We mapped sea level rise, as well as Category 5 example of a tropical system hitting the Hillsborough County area. And what was interesting about that is that enabled us to see geospatially where impacts could exist to the supply chain. And so you can see these 2 examples here on the right of what that looks like and how impactful that really could be. We picked 5 commodities and services to study. Those were derived from the FEMA Community Lifelines guidance. And why that was, as was mentioned by Allison earlier, this is the first time that Hillsborough County has studied supply chain specifically in the context of the broader community. And so it was important to start at the base level of commodities and services required for overall well-being of the community. Those were food and groceries, water, wastewater utility, housing materials, healthcare services and medicine, and fuel distribution systems. I think all of us can agree, and it was vetted during our conversations, that we can't live without these. If we miss one of these, we have serious impacts and or potential life-threatening issues after a disaster or disruption. What we did is we drew up for each of these using data sets, the inputs, the supply, the production, the wholesaling, the retailing, the consumption, and the waste, and did one of these maps for each of the 5 commodities or services. These different areas of the maps identified, for example, what were the raw materials and what were the flows between each of these phases of the supply chain, for example, information and monetary flows, inputs of materials, most critically, as well as transportation flows. Also, the distribution and consumption side of it at the back part. And we're also able to utilize information from this that enabled us to see the modal split of the supply chain components. So for example, how much is transported by water? How much is transported by pipeline, as an example? How much is produced or not produced within the Tampa MSA, as an example? And then what are the biggest, from a purchases perspective, companies in Hillsborough County that would then make up these critical sections of the supply chains? And this gave us some great information. One of them is, how do you identify where, for example, the production of these materials or the wholesaling of these materials, when it predominantly becomes within the Tampa MSA activity, as one example. So these were very helpful in our assessment. We then layered on top of this disaster scenarios. And these disaster scenarios that were considered were 3 and then 2 in combination: cyber attack, transportation incident, and of course flooding and wind events, obviously because of the predominance of those type of hazards in the Florida Peninsula. And we also took into account climate change, and that came through our data sets and our conversations around sea level rise and how that impacts the severity of these type of scenarios and hazards. We also looked in combination: cyber attack plus flooding wind event, as well as cyber attack and transportation incident, to try and assess whether or how much these events might be compounded when in conjunction with some other hazard. And so some cases, in the example of very significant flooding wind events, right, the impact of cyber attack, as an example, exacerbated those issues. In transportation incidents and cyber attacks, right, we saw other hazards as well. The core of looking at the overlay between these commodities and services and these hazards or disruption scenarios, as we called them, really was a matrix that identified the severity and the scope, as well as the impacts to the different supply chain enablers for each of these commodities and each disaster scenario. So we created a very detailed listing of all these impacts to categorize and to understand the overall impacts of each of these in combination. And from that, then we identified areas of future analysis, of other recommendations in transportation, as an example, out of that activity. One of the key things that came out of this was an understanding of access was really essential for disaster response and recovery. So access to essential goods, whether it be through transit, whether it be through existing transportation networks, whether it be through private delivery, right? These are all critical elements to having those materials at hand after a disaster or disruption. Some of the challenges that we heard was that, some stores and some locations in retail were closed during events. Power is king, right? We need to have electricity and backup generation capability to ensure that operations can continue. When there's road and bridge closures, there's access issues, especially with communities with limited access to the transportation network. That then becomes even more acute. Price inflation and panic buying were things that we saw during the pandemic that impacts all types of communities, but certainly those that are in more vulnerable communities that don't have the ability, let's say, to drive 30 or 40 minutes to go pick up toilet paper as an example. Those are issues that we have to be able to see and identify solutions for. And so what we learned from this was redundancy is key. It's important to have resource substitutions available where possible, have emergency staffing plans and frankly, management plans in place for private companies during these events, and have cross-training of staff on the use of equipment and critical operations activities. For example, today, a lot of the fuel infrastructure that we have around, fuel pumping into trucks, as an example, for distribution, is all automated. Very few people have the ability today, from a training perspective, to operate them in a manual fashion, if that's even possible with the equipment that exists today. So that's one learning and one example of some of those issues. So what were the observations and outcomes and what we learned? There is a link between climate change, ESG principles, and supply chain resiliency. And these factors really help us to create habitability and interoperable lifelines. So you think about this, it's really important to link these pieces because holistically they provide a more resilient system of movement and of goods. It's important that the supply chains themselves are resilient and the solutions balance freight needs and community needs. And what this really comes down to is when we think about supply chains themselves and being resilient, it's not just a freight movement issue, right? This is something that in the end provides jobs, provides the ability for people's well-being, and ensures that overall access to goods and services is either quickly reestablished or maintained during a disaster or disruption. Other hazards need to be studied. One of the key things that we saw in this study is that we are doing a lot of planning around tropical systems and the impacts, of course, to Florida and to Hillsborough County and Tampa Bay. But we need to also look, especially within all of our different agencies and even within our private companies, at the other hazards such as cyber attack or transportation incidents and what that does to our supply chains. The other thing that we saw is that Hillsborough County has really great redundant transportation infrastructure overall speaking. There are some network gaps that we were able to identify, as well as congestion areas that are impacted by these hazards or disasters and disruptions. Backup facilities are a critical component of this as well. We saw that during the pandemic of having the ability to warehouse certain goods and services as backups for primary facilities. So some of these recommendations, they were categorized in 5 different buckets. The recommendations relate primarily to transportation, but we do have a number that are related to other areas such as grant opportunities, training, tool, and education opportunities, coordination and study guides or research. We really came up with a large number of recommendations, about 81 of those, and many of them highlight the need for engagement, more engagement with supply chain partners, those that manage or have disaster or resiliency plans around the supply chain enablers of movement of workforce, utility access to clean water or wastewater services. And so it really becomes important to work across the private and the public sphere as in supporting supply chains. So some of these recommendations as examples for you, and again, all of these are published and accessible to see. Really, we looked at the focus on resiliency of strategic facilities as an example when we looked at the data from the HASIS model, as well as the Project Phoenix data sets. We identified areas of critical freight infrastructure that are often susceptible to inundation from storm events, or are a single access point, as an example, during certain hazards or disruptions, such as when there's a transportation incident that cuts off, let's say, the single rail accessibility point for an entire area. An example of that related to transportation, looking at clusters of several critical freight facilities and how these areas may need better infrastructure around stormwater management, around accessibility, for example, of those that commute via bicycle or other public transportation to get to workplaces, as one example. These are all things that we looked at. It's important that we design to coexist. So one of the things that certainly comes out of this is that for any follow-on activity, when we're talking about freight coexisting with communities, it's important that we are looking at areas of joint pedestrian and truck infrastructure, how we look at separating bike and ped infrastructure and having safe ways of moving about our communities in conjunction with accessibility for freight movement. Smart loading zones is a good example. And then, of course, building in community oriented amenities that also provide an environmental or other impacts that are positive, such as stormwater parks that help us with the inundation issues, but enable overall freight movement to surround that area as well. Some other good examples of this are buried utilities and ensuring that we have electrical supply as well as communications capabilities where possible during these events, and looking at specific transportation network elements as well, such as rail upgrades or improved access via roadways, as well as ensuring that we have complete street features, for example, and enhanced stormwater facilities to support these specific areas. So what I'll talk about now in brief is giving you an example of 7 different areas related to transportation. You can imagine, right, some of these lower lying areas have severe inundation risk during strong tropical storms or hurricanes. And it's important to also note that many of these also have only 1 or 2 routes of access to support the transportation movement of goods and services. So for example, one area shows the Hooker's Point area as an example near the port, vulnerable to storm inundation. And considering redundancy of the infrastructure in this area is important. This is number 2 on the slide. An example of areas of vulnerable populations, significant bicycle and ped movement, as well as freight activities, the Boer Channel area. This is recommendation number 1. These areas have impacts that are felt greatly from all of these disasters, disruption scenarios, and have great impacts to the supply chain enablers that enable supply chains in the entire region to function. For example, on the Hooker's Point area, we have wastewater treatment, we have fuel depots and distribution points. These are all critical, elements of our supply chains and the ability to access these goods and services during disasters and disruptions. So this gives you an example of some of the transportation related ones. We also, as was mentioned previously, identified some areas of best practices, identifying ways to help support public and private understanding of disasters, disruptions, the impacts, as well as how to manage through those. One example in the study guide and research area was developing a best practices guide that could be shared in the community for what to do to help supply chains be more resilient. Training tool and education example is developing supply chain resilience best practices training, useful for managers in critical retail and distribution positions. And one of the ideas here, as was mentioned previously, is to ensure that we have more collaboration, more tabletop exercises as an example in the coordination area between public and private, beyond just beyond just a tropical system impact or disaster disruption, but into other areas and incorporating best practices, or frankly, some of the practices that some of the larger private companies are using can be also helpful for smaller companies to assess and potentially implement. And then finally, are there opportunities here to assess the IIJA bipartisan infrastructure law grant opportunities for alternative fuel corridors as one example, and the opportunity to work with FDOT on that activity. So I hope this gave all of you a good overview of the effort, the focus, and some of the results of our study. Again, all of this is available and really indicates some great opportunities for Hillsborough County and the Tampa region to assess further transportation and other supply chain enablers that make resiliency even more effective in the area. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? I know Allison's here too. She might be able to answer some. Aya?
Well, I just want to thank you so much for doing this study and, initially, but I wanted to ask a question about the vulnerabilities that you considered for the study, and the vulnerabilities or the I don't know if you guys can hear me. The vulnerabilities you looked at were more like climate change, roadway issues, but what about like a pandemic or like a public health vulnerability? Did you look into that?
Yeah, so what was interesting about our study is that it enabled us to dig into that very issue quite a bit. We looked at the commodity and services of critical healthcare and medical supply as an example, talked with the hospital group as an example, Tampa General, and really assessed the impact of these three cases and what that does to those supply chains. In that effort, we learned quite a bit about the vulnerabilities and the concerns related to that commodity and service, which helped us understand areas of potential recommendation for that. So we didn't study specifically the pandemic. That was actually a really nice icebreaker for us, though, in all of our conversations. We actually started with, what type of disasters, disruptions have you had in your life that you've experienced, and what did that cause then? From a accessibility, from a workforce availability, from a power or utility or another enablement factor, what did that do for you? What did you see? And a lot of people brought up issues related to the pandemic and issues related to healthcare access and ability to access critical drugs and other things like that. So I think it was very helpful to assess that as one of our commodities and services as a key focus, and then assess it against those three areas of disasters or disruptions to give us some recommendations out of that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to tell you that we had to pick three scenarios. So we picked the transportation, the flooding, and cyber attack on top of that. But I think the matrix can be adapted to others. But if you're specifically interested in pandemic resilience, I know of some sources for literature for that I could provide to you. Yeah. Okay.
No, thank you. That's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions from either committee?
So there's a really large report that's linked to your packet right now, but there's also a shorter 5-page executive summary. You want to peruse that along with this presentation, and we can provide you the sources to that. We're asking for an action today to accept the report, and we've already started coordinating with Tampa Regional Planning Council and Hillsborough County on some next steps as part of the list of recommendations there. So probably we'll be getting in touch with some of you soon.
All right.
Well, this is Nicole Sutton. We did participate in the
Yes,
study, the Department of Health, and so I'd like to go ahead and make a motion to.
Yeah, thank you
accept.
for all your recommendations, by the way.
Okay, thank you, Nicole. Do we have a second? From the TAC, by the way.
Laura Bach, I'll second.
Okay, thank you. We have a second. Any other discussion before we vote? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Thank you. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Allison and Jason.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks all for your input as well for those that participated in the study.
Yeah, thank you. A lot of you really participated quite a bit in the study.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is the 2023 calendar, and it has Wade and Johnny both on here. I don't know if one of you wants to take the lead or how you want to do that, but.
I'll go first since we have the quorum.
Okay. Go ahead, John.
Wade Reynolds.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Wade Reynolds, TPO staff. There is a hard copy of the calendar before you. It's generally the first week of the month, with the exception of September, where it is moved out a week because of Labor Day. So it's that first column there for TAC. Happy to answer any questions if there may be any.
And I think we should also note that we typically recess in July, and you reflected that here too. Any comments or questions from the TAC members? Okay, seeing none, we need to vote. Is that the, okay, so do we have a motion to approve the calendar? So a motion
Jennifer, oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. We had a motion from Bob, and Jennifer, you want a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion? Okay, with that, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, motion carries. Johnny, you want to speak to the?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Johnny Wong, TPO staff. So there is a schedule of the monthly meeting calendar for 2023 in your packet. And for those of you in attendance at the table, it's going to be following the same typical schedule that we always use, which is to have the meetings on the first Wednesday of each month. No interruptions to that this year. There are no holidays that fall on that date. The two changes that you'll notice is that based on the CAC recommendation from some months back, we're moving that meeting time from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. So that will take effect beginning at our first meeting, January 4th. And rather than recessing in July, we usually have the option to do that. In order to have those two optional meetings hosted at different locations around the county, we're going to be meeting in July at an offsite location to be determined. And our joint CAC-TAC meeting in December will also be at an offsite location to be determined. We can't take action on this, but if anyone has any major objections, I'd be happy to note them now.
Thank you. Johnny, I'd like to confirm my observation that the timing of the June meeting for the CAC does precede the TIP hearing on a week later. Am I reading that correctly?
Yes, that's right. So you'll be seeing the final TIP presentation and have the opportunity to take action exactly 1 week before the board hearing on the 14th.
Okay. And I know we can't take action on this, but I would like to ask the sense of our CAC committee. I think these joint meetings are very useful. And looking at the schedule of the TAC, I would certainly welcome a copy of the agenda from the TAC in our meeting packets so we can have some idea of what you've considered, since it occurs a week before our meeting in most cases. If no one else finds that useful, that's fine, but it just occurred to me that it might be helpful.
From staff perspective, I don't think that's a problem at all. I don't think we need a motion to make that happen.
Okay, yeah, we can't act on it. But Christine, you have a comment?
I just would echo that that's a good idea. So I
Thank
like
you.
it.
Okay. All right. Any other comments for John? Yes, from either committee.
Yes, I just wanted to ask, why is the CAC not recessing in July or another month in the summer?
Coordinating the offsite meeting location would be an additional challenge. I don't know, we thought it would be a good opportunity to have one of those optional social events at a time where we don't always meet anyway. Like in 2022, rather than recessing, the committee decided to meet and have an opportunity to talk about to review some presentations that had been pushed out earlier in the year. So you all elected to meet because you thought it was a good idea. I think it's just a good opportunity to catch up and host that social event.
I would imagine you could probably cancel it in May or June if you wanted to as well.
Totally fine by me. Yeah, CAC will have that option. So if you want to elect to recess, we can bring that forward, or someone can offer it as a motion.
Mike, if I may, just to recap, I think Johnny was asking if anyone had any significant objections or comments on the proposed CAC calendar, we'll bring it back for an official vote, but we'll plan on implementing that in January at the very least. And I'll make that report to the TPO board unless there's an objection.
Okay, thanks Wade and Johnny. Next item on the agenda is the 2023 through 2032 HART TDP. And is Omar here or is he online?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm not Omar. Sorry to disappoint, but you're stuck with me for now. Omar had to attend another conflicting meeting, so hi, my name is Jesus. I'm a planner here at HART, and just wanted to give you an update, assuming I can share my screen. I never use GoToWebinar. Oh, something came up. Okay, show. What's going on? Which screen can you see? You see yourselves?
Looks like your email.
Oh, so that's my father's screen. Okay, well, can you see a PowerPoint now?
It looks like PowerPoint with the top 10 ridership routes.
Okay, we're in the right place. Great. I'll be facing that screen. So sorry for not making eye contact.
If you could make it presenter view, that would make it bigger for us.
Yeah.
Or I mean, a presentation view.
Yeah, I did, but it's showing up in another screen. Sorry. Let me see. See if I can put this here. Well, I guess we'll just minimize this and.
That's good.
That's good. Okay, well, thank you for bearing with me. So just a quick update on the transit development plan, part of our yearly update. And this document was finalized late summer. We got some feedback from Florida DOT, and we have already responded. The main feedback was they wanted to see more detail on our financials, how each revenue is linked to each expense, and which projects are funded with which funds that are coming from which pot of money. So we did make that update, and the final product should be going out before we ring in the new year. Just very briefly, the transit development plan identifies the needs. Most of the service needs are unfunded, and the TDP focused mostly on the capital because we have a decades overdue overhaul of our maintenance facility. So that was the main draw of the money allocated on the TDP. So service improvements, which as Commissioner Kemp mentioned earlier, is actually the more expensive part of running transit. We are looking at frequency improvements. So that's our 10-year plan. To give you an idea of how much that costs, so there is a capital and an operating component. It looks like they are comparable. However, remember the capital is a one-time thing. The operating is forever. You buy a car, but you need to pay for gas until the car dies. So the capital here would be acquiring buses, because to increase frequency, you need to put more buses out on the street. And then the operating is you need more bus operators to drive those buses and more fuel. So those are the costs associated with frequency improvements. Those that you saw in this slide is our 30-minute routes. They will go up to 15, which is a very decent headway. Right now, we have just 2 routes that run every 15 minutes on Florida and Nebraska. And then this other unfunded frequency improvements are every 30 minutes. Currently, they run hourly. They would be going up to every 30. You'll notice the operating cost is smaller than it was for the 15-minute ones. So this is, again, very high-level numbers just to give you an idea of what it takes to provide people with the service they're asking for. Our surveys reiterate over and over again that what people want is the bus to come more often. If you miss it, you have to stand out there for an hour. So that's what we're working on right now. Actually, of this 12 hourly routes that you see on this list, 4 we have proposed improvements for March 2023. However, that means taking resources from some other places. So we're not sure that it's going to happen, but we are trying to go in that direction, baby steps in the right direction. To give you an idea of the relationship between ridership and frequency, these are our top 10 ridership routes. They actually carry 2/3 of our daily trips, or total trips. So every day we carry about 30,000 trips. Remember, a trip is not a person because you make a trip in the morning and then a trip in the afternoon. So that's 2 trips. And the top 10 are actually our best frequency routes. The 2 15-minute routes that I mentioned, 2 20-minute routes, the 4 main 30-minute routes, and actually the 30 and the 8 are up there too. It's interesting because the top 5 carries almost half of our ridership, and the top 10 carries 2/3. So then the bottom 22 routes carry 1/3. But you have to balance frequency and coverage because there is more people in the county than just the people that live on the main corridors. Some metrics, which also brings me back to what Commissioner Kemp was talking about earlier. We have some operations metrics. So service is measured in terms of hours of service provided. So how many passengers or how many trips do you carry for every hour? I mean, I could spend like a good 20 minutes going over this, but that's just like a bird's eye view. And then on the bottom, you see the financials. So you'll notice that to run a weekday of service costs $240K. That's what, like 4 times my salary. So, and that's a day of service. And we get in fare revenue about 20,000, which means we have a system-wide fare box recovery of 8%. Commissioner Kemp was mentioning 12, and I actually made some quick research in between an hour and a half ago and now, and that was true before COVID. COVID kind of ruined that for us. We used to be in that 10 to 20% range that Commissioner Kemp mentioned. The cost per rider, so every trip we provide costs almost $8, and the passenger fare covers about 66 cents. So the subsidy that we're covering with federal, state, and local dollars is pretty much the whole thing, $7.22. I hit this slide, but I could go back to it if people want to. In terms of fare box recovery, we have the top 5 and the bottom 5. You'll see that the top 5 are not only the ones, I showed you early frequency before. Right now, this is the routes that generate the more revenue. We are not a for-profit, but we are also trying to make the most of our taxpayer dollars. So the routes that are more revenue producing are the ones with the most frequency and the ones with the most riders as well. And the bottom ones are actually the least frequent. That peak directional means you only have 6 trips a day, 3 trips to the work centers in the morning and 3 trips back home in the evening. on weekdays only. So that's why those fare box recovery ratios are very low. And those other routes, that ones that are hourly, they, for the most part, are fairly low ridership routes. So that's a very quick overview of what our transit development plan is looking right now. It kind of connects to what Commissioner Kemp talked about, to what Ms. Alden talked about the LRTP. So this is like a little piece in that bigger process. So thank you for your time. If you have any questions, I'm here for you. Thank you for having me.
Okay, thank you, Jesus. Any questions from any of the committee members, whether it be here or online? No, seeing none. Okay, thank you very much, Jesus. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is just, I guess, to announce the next meetings, next TAC meetings, which we approved a few minutes ago, would be January 9th, and the CAC would be January 4th at 6 p.m. As Johnny noted, the time change there. The TAC will be at our regular time. Yes. I guess it says technically the TAC is adjourned now, but I don't know, there's an action item for the CAC.
Yeah, Mike, we have one action item scheduled that we're going to actually take a status report on and take comment. And we'd certainly welcome all of our TAC members to stay and join us for that discussion. It has to do with our membership structure. Johnny, you want to be recognized?
Johnny, real quick, unless you need me to stay, I've got another thing I've got to get to, so.
That's fine. No, we don't need you to stick around.
All right.
We gave you all the options with her.
Okay.
If you want to, you're more than welcome.
All right. Thank you, Johnny. Thanks, Wade.
Excuse me, Johnny? Or Chair Roberts?
Yes, who is that?
This is Gail.
Oh, hi, Gail. What's up?
Hi, Mr. Fernandez put in the chat that he noted a point of order, and due to the time constraints and importance of the next item for the CAC action, he recommended that it be tabled until the regular meeting in January.
Okay, I think that's so noted. I think it is agended for 3:15 or 3:05 on our agenda, and we can't take action on it today anyway. So if the committee, unless the committee simply wants to totally defer it, I'd like to give Johnny the opportunity to make a brief presentation. Thank you, Rick, for the observation.
All right, then. Thank you all. Johnny Wong, TPO staff. I'm going to breeze through this at lightning speed. Most of you who are in attendance today also attended last month's workshop where we presented some proposals to you for how to restructure, and we weren't able to take action because that was a workshop. I included a ton of PowerPoint slides for anyone just to provide you with an overview of the entire background of this restructure. We've been working on this for a number of months. Everyone here is familiar with the reasons, because we want to increase accessibility and demographic and geographic representation. Because you all have seen this, I'm just going to quickly go to the proposal that we're going to be recommending to the TPO board to amend the bylaws, and just quickly go over it with you now and talk about what the next steps will be.
Excuse me, Johnny, can you make it so the slides show for the online?
Yeah. I hope. Oh, I can't. Down here? Oh, let's not do that. All right, give me 1 second. right, can you see it, Christine? All right, yeah, I'm so sorry. Yeah, the slides are in the agenda packet. I'm gonna ignore the previous proposal that we brought to you last month. If you recall, we brought two, and we did an informal straw poll just to get a sense of where you all were at and what your preferences were. And I think the only topic that was brought to us that was a new idea was making the term limits consistent for appointees of elected members of the TPO board. So based on that feedback, we did make that change. And so now any representative appointed by an elected TPO board member will remain on the CAC until that board member is replaced or they serve at the pleasure of the board. So if they're removed for whatever reason, but from now on, that will be consistent. The overwhelming favorite for restructuring was proposal 2, which would expand the committee to include 20 at-large seats. Those 20 seats will be reserved for specific underrepresented demographic and geographic areas around the county. And then the remaining members will be appointees of all TPO board members, those that are both elected and non-elected. So with this proposal, the representative from Hart, the Port, Airport, and so on would remain on this committee. The way that we will fill at-large seats is by application, which is no different from the status quo. We recruit candidates and have them apply, and we will present those options to the TPO board. They will vote new members in. We're going to flag specific demographic characteristics that are underrepresented and geographic areas that don't have a representative, and then review that data at the very beginning of the year as part of the attendance review and declaration of vacant seats. So every January, when we present this to the TPO board, we will let them know which areas we need to work on recruiting candidates in order to fill those positions. And I included this on the PowerPoint slide just to make it very clear that all CAC nominees are subject to approval by the TPO board. Last month, there was a little bit of a conversation about what role TPO staff is going to play. And I want to make it clear that our job is to recruit candidates and to do the data analysis to identify our deficiencies. We are not nominating candidates on our own. This is a TPO board action.
Johnny, I'm trying to show my screen and I don't know if anybody online can see it.
I can't see what the screen is.
Gail, it says that you're sharing your screen.
But you're not seeing anything?
We're reviewing gallery. Yeah, we're seeing a slide that says proposal 38 to 39 members.
Johnny, is that the right one?
Yeah, it was. I have skipped to the 31st slide. So if we had a quorum today, I would have asked the CAC to approve the proposed structure. Again, this was based on feedback that we received from you all over a number of months. I think that it meets all of the guidelines that were shared with us, namely having an appointee of each elected TPO board member. So we met that criterion. We resolved the consistency with term limits, and we also expanded the committee to add those at-large seats. So I think this is a win-win-win, and I would have asked you all to approve it. Pending that approval, we would have proposed this to the TPO board in January. Our meeting next week, we will share the bylaws amendment with them as a status update. That'll be the first reading. And then if they ask us to move forward, then it'll be brought forward at the January TPO board meeting for approval. So that is how the process will work. If anyone has any objections, I'd like to hear them. Again, this isn't for action, but we really want to land this plane. And so we are still intending on presenting this as a staff recommendation to the TPO board next Wednesday to stay on target with the bylaws amendment happening in January. And that's it from me. If anyone has any questions or, again, objections, please let me know.
I have a question, Johnny. Is it appropriate to move forward with the process that would begin with the first reading when we actually don't technically have the vote in hand from the CAC for adoption?
So again, in an ideal situation, I would have liked to get the CAC's official stamp of approval. However, because we took that informal poll during the workshop, and this was by far the preferred approach. The only thing we added, in fact, was the other suggestion that you all made about the term limits.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we're hitting the mark on both of those points. And again, like if I got approval today, that would be great. I think what our intention will be is to present it next week as just the staff recommendation, and then let them know that you all have been along with us for this entire process. You know, this was a really good negotiation that we had, very iterative process, and I think that the board will appreciate that.
Chair Roberts,
comments?
Mr.
Yes.
Fernandez says that he has questions and comments as well.
Rick Fernandez, you recognized.
Thank you, Chair. Sound check. You hear me?
Yes, I
Yes,
can.
sir.
Thank you. First off, just as an anecdotal comment, I appreciate the idea of wanting to bring this plane in for a landing. It's been flying around us now for months. The problem I have is the way we're going about doing it, which feels very much like we are, metaphorically building the plane while we're flying it. It's the way this has been thrown together over several meetings with various people, either present or absent, doesn't give me a great deal of comfort. Note the fact that, Johnny, you made the comment that there was an overwhelming approval of one of the options, which is, I guess, option 2. But I'll note there were only 10 people that offered votes during that workshop, less than half of the number of people that we actually have on this committee, as I understand it. 3 people approved option 1. 1 wanted status quo. That happened to be me. And then 6 were in approval of option 2. That is not overwhelming support by my definition of the term. And I'm concerned that that is not the issue or the way that this is presented to the board next week, that the CAC overwhelmingly approves option 2. I don't think that is objectively correct or fair to state. So by way of objection, I will note that. You all do whatever you want with it. But I also have questions regarding the language in the bylaws. If I may, Chair, may I proceed with those questions?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. On page 37 of the PDF document, page 6 of the internal document, the bylaw amendment as was provided in our package. In page 5, we talk about the issue of racial, ethnic minorities, women, persons below median household income, etc. And then you conclude that paragraph at the top of page 6 by saying, and persons from different geographic areas across the country, county must be adequately represented on the CAC. Must be adequately represented on the CAC. I emphasize must. I want, who determines whether or not we have reached that high bar at any given point in time during a given fiscal year? And if it's not met, what does that mean in terms of the legitimacy of the committee, in terms of any action that it may take while that metric has not been met?
Is that the end of the question, Rick?
That's the end of that question.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, thank you. So that's the purpose of doing the geographic and demographic review at the beginning of every year, is to allow the board to set goals for us to achieve and to guide our recruitment efforts. We're never going to hit precisely the census breakdown of different demographic groups, and it would be almost impossible to achieve 100% geographic representation based on community. However, we've identified the process with you and described it a few times. I didn't want to go into too much detail about the way that the geographic methodology is going to work because it's highly technical. And so we left the language about adequate representation based on the understanding that we're going to use the same process that's been identified. If you have an issue with the methodology, I think we can talk about that, and we should talk about that soon. However, I don't think that there was anyone on the committee, correct me if I'm wrong, who had any qualms with it.
Well, I don't know about.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know about anyone having qualms with it. I mean, I had qualms with the size of the number of people we're talking about adding. My concern is with ambiguity in the language and how that ambiguity might come back to bite us later. If you're going to use a metric of adequately representing all of these individual communities, then I would suggest that rather than use the mandatory must language, that you refer to it more in terms of a goal to be reached. I believe that if you continue to use the term must in your bylaws, and if it can be shown that indeed that representation is not adequate at any given point in time, that you call the legitimacy of the CAC into question at that point in time. I don't know what practical difference that makes. We have no authority to do anything, but making an amendment to the bylaws is a significant issue, and it's going to be there, and we're going to be living with it for years. This process of changing it is a pain in the butt. I don't want to have to go through it again. And I'm telling you, this is a problem, and it would take a relatively small change to avoid it. But again, you can do what you want with it, but I won't approve or vote to approve this or recommend approval with that kind of language in there. So that refers to that particular section at the top of page 6. The other question I have was with regards to terms of appointment, if I may move to that, Chair.
Rick, you may, if I may ask Ed if he had a question or comment about the previous question.
Sure. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Turn your microphone on, please.
It seems like that could be easily resolved by changing must to something like will strive to. I mean, that's a simple change that, I think fixes Rick's concern.
Rick, I'm not sure if you can hear the conversation in the room. We're having a little bit of a sidebar, and we agree that we can easily fix that language and replace must with should or something to that effect.
It can be
so
like
your point's well taken.
Shall to the extent possible, or something to the most extent possible.
Strive to, yeah.
I think there is, if I may, Johnny, I think there's a general feeling, I won't say consensus, that that language needs to be tweaked a bit.
Thank you.
Okay, Rick, go ahead. You had a second question regarding length of term.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Let's see. This is page 6 of the internal document, page 37 of the PDF doc, depending on how you're following along in your hymnals. Term of appointment. For at-large members and unelected members of the TPO board shall be for then you've struck through 2-year, and the language now is for a period of up to 6 years. This again suggests a level of ambiguity to me that could come back to bite us later. My understanding was that our terms, my at-large appointment, for instance, is a 2-year term. This now suggests my at-large appointment could be up to 6 years, but it does not limit me to 2. So I'm not clear at all as to what the length of my appointment is with the language in this bylaw as it's currently being presented.
Right, Rick. So if the change takes effect, the clock will be reset at the first month following board action. So if the board approves the bylaw amendment in January, that 6-year clock will be reset on that day. So even though you have served in an at-large capacity, you'll have 6 more years. pending
So
board
are you
approval.
telling me are you telling me that under this bylaw amendment, my at-large appointment, an appointment that came through the committee, approved then by the TPO board, my appointment to the CAC would be a 6-year term, not a 2-year term?
6-year term, pending approval of the board, pending approval of the bylaw amendment by the board, 6-year period, 6-year clock will start on that day. So yeah, you're right. No longer 2-year for any member.
Well, that's interesting. I don't remember having that conversation before, but all right.
Rick, if I may interject, it's Christine. I wanted to say that's a brand new piece of information. I don't remember having discussed it at all. I'm not saying I'm pro or con on it. I'm just saying that that's a brand new piece of information, the terms going to 6 years.
That was in the proposal that we made last month. So the only difference between last month's proposal and now is that we're including representatives of elected TPO board members. We proposed the 6-year term limit last time. I don't remember that anyone had any comments other than pertaining to the length of service for appointees of elected board members. Thank you.
Okay, I apologize. I just didn't remember it.
I just wanted to kind of bring, what I remember about this is that members brought up the concern that that 2 years was too short because the acquired experience that the members gain over time. So I hope you remember that part. And then the second part was about if the term time will be connected to the time of the commissioners, then it will be parallel to the same cycle as the commissioners based on the appointment. So if the commissioner can do up to 3 terms in a row, then 6 years was something like that.
Right.
So do you guys remember that?
Yeah, Johnny, if I can comment, I think memories are a little different in this area. I think that my recollection of that conversation was that we would have the 2-year terms renewable for up to 6 years. Because I'm concerned, frankly, that if you ask somebody to sign up to be on this committee and tell them that their term is 6 years, that's the term, they're making a 6-year commitment. That may deter people from serving on the committee. I would be much more in favor of a term of 2 or 3 years that could be renewed. So for that reason and a number of other reasons, I'd like to have this come back before the committee for further discussion. Yes, Hoyt.
Well, and I think, part of the issue too is that especially with the electeds, they're elected for 4 years. And if you're appointed by someone and, in 4 years they lose, well, you're fired basically from the committee. So I tend to agree with you, Mr. Chair, that my sentiment and recollection was mirroring yours on the 6 years and 2-year limits.
So let's put this down as an item for discussion at the next meeting. And I guess my question, Johnny, and maybe Rick asked it earlier, is there great harm in not asking the TPO board to take action at their next meeting? Are they under some sort of a time clock that we need to respect?
Would just like to move forward with annual review in January. If there's no objection to that.
Can whoever's speaking go on mic, please?
Sorry,
Thank you,
Gail, it's
Gail.
Beth. So at the board meeting next week, it'll just be a status report anyway. The board can't take action at their first consideration of a bylaws change. So we'd like to give them a status report. In January, we'd like to do our annual attendance review and seek your support for recruitment goals for the year. And then we'd like to get going on recruitment. I don't see any reason not to change that language about the terms. We could certainly change that to, 2-year terms, for up to, up to 3 2-year terms, something like that. That's simple enough. And we can certainly, bring this back again in January and Hopefully, we'll have a quorum in person in January. But we can certainly put that back on the agenda for you in January.
Thank you. Thank you, Beth. I think, judging by the comments we've had today, the committee would like to have one more crack at it, and failing a quorum at our next meeting, I won't ask for it to come back again. Rick, did you have anything else? And then I have Christine wants to be recognized.
Well, I'll just note again my concern that the status report, whatever it happens to be coming from Johnny or Beth, that it not get too far out over its skis as to where we currently are. But basically, yeah, we need to take another bite at this apple in January. And I think to suggest anything more than that at this point to the board, which, by the way, is going to be relatively new with new leadership, they're going to have a lot of things to take care of next week. And
Right.
some of them are not going to know a damn thing about the CAC, let alone how we're structured. So I'm concerned that we don't put too much down their throat next week and kind of get them lost in the shuffle with information that it isn't really chiseled in stone yet. We're still a work in progress here. So just ask you please to be cautious and fair in how you advise them.
Thank you. Christine, do you have a comment?
Thank you. Yeah, Rick said most of what I was going to say, but I also want to convey that we all want to land this plane. We want to be done with this. It is a topic, but I think that to be really cautious and careful is warranted because these are the bylaws and they will be in place for a long time. And we want to make sure that that we don't leave anything in there that trips us up or invalidates our actions and our motions and our requests. So I think we're just stuck with it for one more month until we could really nail it down.
Okay, thank you.
Hopefully just one. Thank you.
Any other comments from anyone online? Johnny, do you want to make further comment or?
No, I won't hold this meeting up any longer than what it already has. I appreciate you bearing with us. Thank you so much.
No, thank you for bringing forth a document that at least we can read, we can study the language, and I think that at our next meeting, we'll be able to take some action on it. Anything else to come before the CAC before we adjourn? Anyone online have any other new business?
I have one item of old business. So at the last month's meeting, we had a presentation on rail crossings on Polk Street, and I did follow up with DOT and the rail administration on that. And I was told that the technology being installed on Polk Street wouldn't qualify for an exemption. So the train operators would still have to sound their whistles, unfortunately. We're looking to get a little bit more detail on that, but that's a story I heard from District 7 yesterday.
Okay, good. All right. Well, thank you, committee members. Thank you online. And with that, we are adjourned.